Golden Age Hollywood stars with shockingly bad hygiene. Old Hollywood stars with terrible hygiene. For decades, the studio system painted an illusion of perfection. Flawless idols who seemed untouchable, larger than life. Their faces glowed on magazine covers, their voices floated like silk across radios, and their images lit up silver screens with a kind of divine brilliance. But what if I told you that behind those dazzling smiles and custom-tailored tuxedos lay some of the most revolting hygiene habits you could imagine? What if the same gods and goddesses adored by millions were secretly repulsing the very co-stars forced to share a set, or worse, a kiss, with them? The shocking truth is that many of Hollywood's most celebrated icons were hiding dirty secrets that no studio publicist dared let slip. Stories of halitosis so unbearable that love scenes became torture, of body odor so pungent it cleared entire sets, of stars who flat-out refused to bathe, wash their hair, or even brush their teeth. These were not just quirks, they were stomach-turning habits that clashed violently with their carefully polished public images. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on these long-buried realities. For the first time, we'll explore the disturbing hygiene habits of 15 Golden Age legends, from dental disasters to bathing boycotts, from foul breath to notorious odor. These revelations may forever change the way you watch their perfect films. The glamorous facade is about to shatter. What's left might shock you beyond repair. Gable. Clark Gable, the king of Hollywood with a secret that could kill the mood in an instant. His very name conjures images of polished charm, rugged masculinity, and that unforgettable smirk that melted audiences worldwide. As Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind, he spoke one of cinema's most immortal lines, forever sealing his place in history. Women swooned at the sight of him on screen, their hearts racing at the thought of being near the silver screen's ultimate leading man. But if they had stood within arm's reach, that thrill might have turned into something far less romantic. By just 32 years old, Gable had almost no natural teeth left. Not a few missing, not partial plates, an entire set of dentures replaced them. The culprit was periodontitis, a vicious gum disease that ravaged his mouth until his dentist made the drastic decision to extract nearly everything. The pain was excruciating, forcing Gable into a secret recovery in Canada. What followed was a lifelong struggle with primitive dentures, uncomfortable, ill-fitting, and worst of all, leaving him with a case of halitosis so notorious it became Hollywood legend. Behind the camera, his leading ladies dreaded love scenes with the king. Sophia Loren, his co-star in it, started in Naples, 1960, reportedly begged the director to minimize their close contact. For all his cinematic magnetism, the reality was far less alluring. Even in his final role, The Misfits, 1961, crew members whispered about the overwhelming odor that lingered several feet away. And yet, no one dared confront him. His stardom was untouchable. Clark Gable still reigned as Hollywood's king, but his breath ensured he would never get too close to his queens. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford's dazzling smile hid a nightmare few ever knew. Behind the iconic lips that lit up Hollywood screens was a dental disaster born of vanity and pain. Like many stars chasing perfection, Crawford submitted to radical procedures meant to sharpen her cheekbones and mimic the hollow-cheeked allure of Marlene Dietrich. Dentists pulled several molars to reshape her face, but the results were catastrophic. Her front teeth began to drift apart, forcing doctors to fill the gaps with cement and grind them down to fit caps. The agony was unbearable, and worse, it triggered infections that left her mouth swollen. The swelling permanently enlarged her upper lip, an accident of cosmetic surgery that ironically became one of her most famous features. By her late 60s, the toll was undeniable. Crawford endured grueling dental surgeries that required round-the-clock medical care. Yet she never let the world see her weakness. The perfectionist who demanded spotless homes, flawless posture, and meticulous makeup could not conquer the one battlefield inside her own mouth. Makeup artists whispered about the sharp contrast, her immaculate face painted to perfection, while her teeth and gums deteriorated beneath the surface. Even more unsettling were the rumors whispered through studio corridors, that her breath, worsened by heavy drinking in her later years, betrayed the glamour she worked so hard to project. Joan Crawford's story is more than Hollywood beauty. It is the haunting reminder of how far stars would go, suffering in silence, to keep their images untouchable. Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe, the dirty bombshell. Behind the shimmering blonde curls and flawless gowns that made her the ultimate sex symbol of Hollywood's golden age, Monroe harbored personal habits that shattered her carefully polished image. According to multiple accounts, including whispers from her The Misfits co-star Clark Gable, Monroe was shockingly careless about hygiene. Off-screen, the goddess of desire rarely bathed, often skipped undergarments, and seemed indifferent to the very basics of cleanliness. Biographer David Brett revealed that Gable, a man obsessed with neatness, was repelled by Monroe's habits and dismissed rumors of any romance between them. He claimed she sometimes went days without bathing and never touched deodorant. This stunning contrast between the fantasy Hollywood sold and the reality of Monroe's private life highlights just how artificial stardom could be. Her longtime makeup artist, Alan Whitey Snyder, who knew her better than most, had to invent tricks to maintain her glow on set. Armed with baby wipes and heavy powder, he worked tirelessly to keep Monroe fresh between takes, disguising what others quietly noticed. Even the wardrobe department staff shared shocking anecdotes, proof that the woman the world worshipped as a goddess was, in truth, deeply human and far from perfect. Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes. The name once evoked images of a debonair Hollywood producer and daring aviation pioneer, a man who dated starlets, built empires, and redefined ambition. But behind the charm and tailored suits lurked a mind at war with itself. Hughes's lifelong battle with obsessive-compulsive disorder began as a private quirk, but with age, it spiraled into a full-blown nightmare that consumed every part of his existence. The man once praised for his immaculate grooming and relentless pursuit of perfection descended into a reclusive germaphobe whose life became a theater of bizarre rituals. He refused to bathe for months, let his hair and nails grow to grotesque lengths, and wore tissue boxes on his feet as makeshift shoes. In his later years, Hughes isolated himself in dark hotel rooms, stripped naked, and surrounded by jars of his own urine, living in what he called clean zones that were anything but. The contradictions were chilling. While he let his own body decay, his standards for women remained impossibly high. Scotty Bowers, in his scandalous memoir Full Service, revealed Hughes's disturbing double standard. If a woman had even the slightest blemish, he wouldn't touch her. For himself, filth and squalor. For others, flawless beauty. This tragic transformation was made even more striking by the memory of who Hughes once was. In the 1930s, he was a magnetic figure in Hollywood, courting icons like Katharine Hepburn, Jean Harlow, and Ava Gardner, his sharp suits and polished demeanor setting the standard for elegance. Employees remembered him changing shirts several times a day, demanding spotless environments, and obsessing over cleanliness. But by the 1940s, cracks in his brilliance were impossible to ignore. Secretaries spoke of his elaborate hand-washing rituals, 15 minutes at a time, with a fresh bar of soap and a towel he dared touch only at the corners. Howard Hughes's story is not just one of wealth and genius. It is the haunting saga of a man whose brilliance was slowly strangled by the very obsessions that once fueled his rise. Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn, the swashbuckling golden boy of Hollywood, was every bit the image of charm and daring on screen. With his athletic build, devilish grin, and fearless leaps across castle walls, he became Warner Brothers' most bankable heartthrob of the 1930s and 40s. Audiences adored him in Captain Blood, 1935, and The Adventures of Robin Hood, 1938, where he seemed the very definition of dashing perfection. But behind the curtain, the real Flynn was far less polished. His notorious appetite for alcohol and women wasn't a studio invention, it was the messy truth. And those habits came with a price that no one saw on the silver screen: his hygiene. As Flynn's drinking escalated, so did the challenges for his co-stars and crew. His sweat reportedly reeked of liquor, his breath could knock someone back by mid-afternoon, and his tendency to wear the same clothes for days only deepened the problem. The man who swung from riggings like a hero often stumbled off set in the same shirt he'd slept in. By the 1940s, the deterioration was undeniable. Costume notes from Warner Brothers hint at refreshing his wardrobe more often than any other actor's, and some costumes were even engineered with removable panels to discreetly manage the odor. Through it all, Flynn's leading lady, Olivia de Havilland, handled the matter with grace. While maintaining his dignity, she would gently suggest a mouthwash or a freshened look before intimate scenes, subtle cues that only someone with her tact could deliver. Publicly, Flynn remained the gallant hero. Privately, he was a man slowly undone by addiction, his legendary image clashing with the very human flaws he could never outrun. Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando. The genius who redefined acting, and the rebel who refused to play by Hollywood's rules, even when it came to basic hygiene. His performances in A Streetcar Named Desire and On the Waterfront shook the very foundations of screen acting, Yet behind the brilliance was a man as infamous for his body odor as for his artistry. As Brando aged and his weight fluctuated wildly, his disregard for cleanliness grew notorious. Co-stars whispered about his refusal to bathe, directors begged him to use deodorant, but Brando shrugged it all off. By the time he stepped onto the set of Apocalypse Now in the late 1970s, his hygiene had deteriorated along with his body and mind. Francis Ford Coppola and the crew weren't just battling Brando's unpredictable demands. They were fighting to endure the suffocating presence of his overpowering scent. What made Brando's case remarkable was that much of it seemed deliberate. His poor hygiene wasn't just neglect, it was a rejection of Hollywood's polished facade, a physical act of rebellion against the very system that crowned him king. Even during A Streetcar Named Desire, the film that made him a global sex symbol, director Elia Kazan had to plead with him to bathe more often. His co-star Vivien Leigh found his odor unbearable during their steamy, physical scenes. That famous moment when Stanley bellows, "Stella," in his sweat-drenched t-shirt? It wasn't entirely acting. Brando's pungency was all too real. As his fame and influence grew, so did his indifference. On the set of The Godfather, makeup artists reportedly struggled to prepare him, working overtime to mask the traces of his disregard for soap and water. Ironically, his role as the aging Don Corleone helped conceal some of it on screen, but behind the camera, Brando's habits left the crew exasperated. Once hailed as Hollywood's most magnetic leading man, Brando morphed into its most unapologetic rebel, proving that for him, method acting didn't just mean becoming the character. It meant rejecting every expectation, even the smell of stardom itself. James Dean. James Dean wasn't just a rebel on screen. He carried that defiance into his daily life, even with something as simple as bathing. To him, personal hygiene almost became a statement against Hollywood's polished perfection. Dean often went days, even weeks, without changing his clothes or stepping into a shower. On the set of Rebel Without a Cause, director Nicholas Ray had to quietly pull him aside after complaints from crew members about his body odor. Natalie Wood, tasked with playing his love interest, endured the discomfort during their romantic scenes, her professionalism masking the unease, just as actresses decades earlier had tolerated Clark Gable's infamous bad breath. Friends from his New York days remembered Dean's tiny, run-down apartment with unreliable hot water, where bathing was more luxury than routine. But even after Hollywood fame gave him comfort and money, the habit stuck. Elia Kazan, who launched Dean's career in East of Eden, 1955, later wrote that Dean seemed to cultivate a rugged, earthy quality that extended to his lifestyle. Yet even Kazan, accustomed to actors like Brando who rejected Hollywood's polish, admitted he sometimes had to address Dean's hygiene when filming in tight quarters. Julie Harris, his co-star in East of Eden, remembered Dean's red socks that he refused to take off for weeks, calling them his lucky charm. His favorite leather jacket was rarely cleaned, the grime and wear considered by Dean as part of its soul. These quirks weren't just bad habits, they became superstitions, woven into his identity. To Dean, the dirt, the odor, the lived-in clothes weren't flaws to hide, but extensions of the rebellious persona that made him unforgettable. Judy Garland. Judy Garland's brilliance on stage and screen often hid a quieter, more painful truth. Her battles with mental health and addiction sometimes stripped away even the most basic acts of self-care. While the world remembers her radiant smile in The Wizard of Oz and her powerhouse voice in A Star is Born, behind the glamour was a woman struggling just to hold herself together. From her earliest days at MGM, when she was forced onto a brutal cycle of diet pills to keep her thin, amphetamines to keep her awake, and barbiturates to make her sleep, Garland's body and mind were pushed past their limits. The very system that turned her into a star also robbed her of the ability to maintain her own well-being. Makeup artists on The Wizard of Oz whispered that, even at just 16, her skin already bore the scars of chemical abuse. By the 1940s, as her addictions deepened, MGM staff worked tirelessly to preserve her star image while she appeared on set exhausted, disheveled, her weight swinging wildly and her teeth deteriorating from neglect and medication. By the time she filmed A Star is Born in 1954, her husband and producer Sid Luft reportedly had to assign someone to ensure she bathed and groomed before facing the cameras. On her best days, when sober and stable, she was immaculate, dazzling, every inch the star audiences adored. But on her worst days, she arrived with unwashed hair, the sour breath of alcohol and cigarettes clinging to her, a visible portrait of the inner battles she could never fully escape. What makes Garland's story so haunting is that her lapses in hygiene were never about carelessness. They were symptoms of a much deeper torment. During the filming of her final picture, I Could Go On Singing in 1963, co-star Dirk Bogarde recalled the heartbreaking swings. Some days she was radiant, professional, full of charm. Other days, her disheveled appearance mirrored the chaos inside her. Bogarde, like many who loved her, understood that these struggles weren't about vanity. They were the cruel evidence of a life consumed by pressure, addiction, and untreated mental pain. Judy Garland's Hygiene became yet another casualty of a system that demanded perfection from a woman fighting battles far too heavy to carry alone. Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was larger than life, but behind the glittering image was a secret that shocked those who got close: his royal halitosis. By the 1960s, Hollywood was changing fast. The old studio system was crumbling, and stars like Elvis enjoyed unprecedented freedom. Freedom to reinvent themselves, freedom to indulge their quirks, and, sometimes, freedom to let their flaws slip into view. Elvis, whose meteoric leap from music to movies made him one of the most bankable stars of the era, was meticulous about some aspects of his appearance. His jet black hair was perfectly styled, sculpted with dyes, waxes, and pomades. But while the world admired the man's dazzling looks, his dental hygiene was quietly falling apart. Years of prescription drugs, painkillers, tranquilizers, stimulants, ravaged his body and dulled his discipline. His teeth grew discolored, and his once magnetic smile carried with it a problem no Hollywood script could hide: terrible breath. Actress Marianne Mobley, who co-starred with him in Girl Happy, 1965, later confessed that kissing Elvis on screen was far less romantic than fans dreamed. By the time he filmed Paradise, Hawaiian Style in 1966, things had gotten worse. Co-star Susanna Lee revealed that she had to master clever tricks during kissing scenes, breathing through her mouth or angling her face, just to endure the closeness. The irony was brutal. The world's most desired man could charm millions with a song, yet his breath repelled the very women hired to kiss him. As the years wore on, the problem only deepened. In Las Vegas, under hot stage lights in the 1970s, makeup artists worked desperately to preserve the illusion of the Elvis his fans remembered. They fought not only against his rapid weight gain but also the toll of his spiraling drug use and neglect of basic hygiene. Perhaps most tragically, by his final years, Elvis, the man once so obsessed with image he wouldn't allow photographs from unflattering angles, had grown indifferent. Hygiene became another casualty of his decline. And when he died in 1977, the gap between the myth his fans cherished and the reality of his broken body was staggering. The king who once embodied perfection on stage had lived a private life filled with contradictions, another Hollywood icon whose reality behind closed doors was far from the legend the world adored. Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor, the woman whose violet eyes and dazzling beauty crowned her the queen of Hollywood. On screen, she was Cleopatra, the ultimate image of power and perfection. Off-screen, however, Taylor's carefully polished image sometimes clashed with a much more human reality: her deeply personal struggles. During the filming of Cleopatra in 1963, one of the most expensive and chaotic productions in cinema history, whispers spread among the Italian crew about her inconsistent bathing habits. To them, American stars already carried different standards of hygiene, but Taylor's habits seemed tied to something more intimate: her emotions. A makeup artist who worked closely with her admitted that when Elizabeth was in love, stable and glowing, she was meticulous, her grooming flawless, her presence radiant. But when her stormy romance with Richard Burton plunged into chaos, or when depression shadowed her life, she might go days without stepping into a bath, masking the truth beneath clouds of perfume and powder. Director Joseph L. Mankiewicz, who had guided her in Suddenly, last summer, 1959, and now battled through the chaos of Cleopatra, devised a subtle system to help. Instead of embarrassing the star he revered, he would send in a trusted female assistant to casually mention that a hot bath had been prepared for her comfort. This gentle gesture allowed Taylor to preserve her dignity while quietly addressing what others dared not mention. Behind the legend of Elizabeth Taylor lay a fragile truth: her beauty and glamour were never just skin-deep. They were mirrors reflecting her emotional highs and lows, proof that even a goddess of the screen was, at heart, human. Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin, the man who gave the world The Tramp, built one of cinema's most unforgettable characters. With his shabby suit, crooked bowler hat, and awkward charm, the Tramp became a symbol of resilience and humanity. But what audiences never saw was how, at times, Chaplin's own personal habits blurred uncomfortably with the character he created. Behind the brilliance, there were whispers of poor hygiene. Lita Grey, Chaplin's second wife, whom he controversially married when she was just 16 and he was 35, painted an unflattering picture in her divorce papers, describing his bathing habits as inconsistent and often unpleasant. While her accusations may have been sharpened by bitterness, others who worked closely with Chaplin admitted the same. When he was buried in a project, he could neglect even the basics of hygiene. Yet, no studio boss dared confront him. Chaplin wasn't just another star. He was a genius, a one-of-a-kind artist Hollywood couldn't afford to lose. Still, Chaplin was a man of contradictions. At premieres and public events, he could transform himself into the picture of elegance. Sharply dressed, perfectly groomed, and worlds apart from both his on-screen persona and his reported private habits. By the 1940s, as Chaplin's political views stirred more controversy than his cleanliness, stories about his hygiene quietly faded. Whether this was because he changed his ways, or because the world had bigger scandals to focus on, remains unclear. What is certain is that the man who invented cinema's most beloved vagrant sometimes carried a little too much of the tramp into real life, not just in the walk and mustache, but in the smell as well. Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart, the Hollywood icon whose gravelly voice and tough guy stare defined the golden age of film noir. On screen, he was the embodiment of rugged masculinity, the man every guy wanted to be and every woman wanted to love. But behind the smoldering cigarettes and whiskey-laced charm lay a secret that co-stars knew all too well. Bogart's breath could clear a room. Years of chain smoking, sometimes 3 packs a day, mixed with hard liquor and neglected dental care left him with a reputation that didn't show up on the big screen. Leading ladies who melted under his gaze often winced the moment the cameras stopped rolling. Lauren Bacall, who fell in love with him on the set of To Have and Have Not in 1944, seemed to be the rare exception. Their chemistry was real, so real that her famous line, "You know how to whistle, don't you? You just put your lips together and blow," carried an intimacy untouched by his flaws. Others weren't so lucky. Ingrid Bergman, the luminous star opposite Bogart in Casablanca, 1942, was said to have quietly pleaded with director Michael Curtiz to limit close-up kisses. The restrained farewell at the foggy airport may owe less to cinematic genius and more to Bergman's effort to dodge Bogart's smoke-tinged exhalations. By the time he filmed The African Queen, 1951, with Katharine Hepburn, his dental issues had worsened. Shooting in the African heat only amplified what Hepburn later called aromatic challenges. What's striking is that Bogart knew. He reportedly joked about it, shrugging it off as the unavoidable price of the lifestyle he refused to abandon. Cigarettes, whiskey, late nights, they weren't just props. They were part of who he was. And in the end, they cost him dearly. His tough guy image may have been flawless on film, but off camera, even Bogey couldn't escape the human truths he worked so hard to mask. Rita Hayworth. Rita Hayworth, the fiery red-haired bombshell who defined Hollywood glamour, lived with a secret torment hidden behind the dazzling spotlight. Known as the love goddess in films like Gilda, 1946, she embodied perfection on screen. But off camera, Rita battled painful consequences of the very beauty regimen that made her a star. Born Margarita Carmen Cancino to a Spanish father and Irish-American mother, she was told by Columbia Pictures studio boss Harry Cohn that her exotic look wasn't American enough. To transform her image, the studio forced her into grueling cosmetic procedures. Most cruelly, a year-long electrolysis treatment that raised her hairline by an inch. The process left her scalp scarred, hypersensitive, and plagued with chronic dermatitis. Behind the flawless curls and iconic updos, Rita endured constant itching, flaking, and pain. Hairdressers masked the damage with elaborate hairstyles, while makeup artists dusted her scalp with skin-colored powder to hide irritation between takes. Yet the suffering didn't end there. Her natural dark hair was repeatedly stripped and dyed with harsh, toxic chemicals to maintain her famous copper-red shade, further worsening her condition. Even Orson Welles, her husband from 1943 to 1947, later admitted with compassion that Rita was haunted by the physical scars of studio-mandated beauty. Her radiant image may have enchanted millions, but it came at a devastating personal cost, one she bore in silence beneath the Hollywood lights. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift, once the golden boy of Hollywood with his piercing eyes and raw, vulnerable performances, saw his world shatter one night in 1956. Leaving a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's home, his car slammed into a telephone pole, an accident that would not only scar his beautiful face but also forever alter his spirit. Before the crash, Clift was known for his unconventional ways, but he still carried himself with the polish expected of a leading man. Afterward, everything unraveled. Chronic pain and disfigurement pushed him toward an ever-growing dependence on alcohol and prescription drugs. As the addictions tightened their grip, even the simplest acts of self-care slipped away. By the time he stood before cameras in The Misfits, 1961, Clift's hygiene had become a quiet crisis on set. Director John Huston sympathized, but makeup artists whispered of the struggle. Clift arriving unwashed, clothes crumpled and worn for days, requiring not only the concealment of scars but also basic grooming just to make him camera-ready. What made his decline so haunting was that it wasn't vanity lost, it was trauma made visible. The deterioration of his appearance mirrored the torment within. And yet, through it all, Elizabeth Taylor never abandoned him. She remained his fiercest ally, even arranging personal assistance during Suddenly, last summer, 1959, to ensure he bathed, ate, and dressed with dignity. To the world, Montgomery Clift was fading. But to Taylor, and to those who truly saw him, he was still the sensitive genius who had once redefined Hollywood stardom, a man battling demons born of tragedy, not choice. Tallulah Bankhead. Tallulah Bankhead, Broadway and Hollywood's original wild child. A woman whose husky voice, flamboyant charm, and outrageous lifestyle made her unforgettable on and off the stage. She lived life as if the rules were written for someone else, and that included her personal hygiene. Famous for her raucous parties, heavy drinking, drug binges, and scandalous affairs, Bankhead treated bathing as more of a suggestion than a necessity. Biographers note that during theater runs she sometimes went days without stepping into a tub, insisting it dried out her skin and weakened her performances. Unlike other stars who might have hidden such habits, Tallulah wore them proudly, turning even her lack of soap and water into part of her larger-than-life persona. "I'm as pure as the driven slush," she once quipped, and she meant it. Fueled by bourbon, cocaine, and raw theatrical energy, Bankhead refused to bend to Hollywood's standards of glamour. To her, skipping a bath wasn't a failure, it was rebellion. By the time she starred in her final major role, Die, My Darling in 1965, her eccentric ways had only grown stronger. Co-star Stephanie Powers later confessed that working beside her was a full-on sensory assault, one that demanded stamina to endure. And that's the stomach-turning truth. Behind the glitter of old Hollywood, some of its brightest legends carried secrets that didn't just shock, they stank. If you found these revelations as jaw-dropping as they are revolting, hit that like button and subscribe to Golden Legacy for more untold histories of Hollywood's biggest names. Drop a comment below and tell us, which hygiene horror left you speechless? Or who should we uncover next? Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the truth doesn't just stink. It absolutely reeks. See you in the next video, where we'll expose even more secrets Hollywood never wanted you to know.